Hi, everyone. Welcome to our BlackBerry Live session, our LinkedIn Live. This is going to be the first one in a series that we're going to be doing, hopefully, for a long time. We're going to discuss threats. We're going to talk about applied research, applied countermeasures. We're going to talk about news that are relevant, things related to threat research, threat hunting, cyber defense, anything that is relevant to the research and the intelligence community. And on this one, I'm very excited to say that we're going to be talking about our presence at Black Hat next week in Vegas. Yes, we're going to be there. BlackBerry is going to be there, and a few of us is going to be there. So hopefully we'll see you around as well, either physically or virtually. We're going to talk about how you can get in touch with us and ask us questions about what we're going to be discussing today, because we're going to be talking about Linux threats in particular. And to do so, we have two of our speakers, our amazing threat hunters, Dmitry Bestuzhev and Ryan Chapman. Now, I introduce you as threat hunters, but that's kind of a very generic term for what you guys do, which is a lot. So instead of me introducing you, why don't you just introduce yourselves? Maybe starting with Dmitry. Tell us a little bit more about what you do at BlackBerry and what's your background.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isma. Yes, I joined the company about 2 months ago, and it's been such a pleasant journey so far. So I joined as a most distinguished threat researcher, and I'm working with threats targeting our customers and also cyber threat intelligence.
Thank you, Dimitri. We're so happy to have you here with us. Same as Ryan Chapman. What do you do, Ryan, for BlackBerry?
Hey, thank you. I've been here for just about 3 years as of last week, actually, and I work as a principal incident response consultant. So when the bad things happen, we get called in and go in there and tell the hackers to go away.
I love it. I love it. Punch them in the face. By the way, I love your background. Really amazing.
Thank you. Appreciate it. The wife really helped me out, make things really cool in here.
I love it. I love it. So you can see, right, the quality and the caliber of our guests today. And as you probably know, for many years, the threat research and intelligence team has been very prolific in writing reports. And one of the things that this team has characterized for is for the coverage of Linux threats, which makes sense based on the fact that BlackBerry has been focused on securing, mobile devices for a long time, and more recently IoT devices, automotive. I think the one of the last things I read about is like over 200 million cars running our software, right? So that gives you an idea of how much focus we have in securing these type of operating systems. I remember a couple of years ago, the report came out, the Decade of the Rats in 2020, mentioning Linux as one of the increasing targets for threat actors. Now it makes sense, right? But what I have seen, and I want to have your opinion on that, over the last few years, is that typically many organizations they've been focusing on like the front office, right, the desktops, the Windows environment, and thinking that okay, Linux is on the back end, so maybe we shouldn't care that much about it. And even vendors, many vendors, they haven't paid attention to Linux until maybe very recently. But the reality is that most of the IoT devices, as we know them, they're based out of Linux operating systems, right? Embedded Linux containers. The cloud reminds me of this meme. You've probably seen it, right, Dimitri and Ryan? This son that says, "Hey, Daddy, what are the clouds made of?" And the dad is like, "Linux servers mostly, my son." Right? Have you seen that one? So it's the truth. So the reality is that we have been doing a lot of research recently. Dimitri, I saw your webinar on Symbiote, this report that we co-authored with Inteser. And Inteser, by the way, one of our partners, they've been reporting a lot of increase in Linux attacks over the last year, including ransomware innovation. And I want to ask you about that later on, Ryan. So let me start with you, Dima, about Linux threats. You talked about Symbiote recently. What are other? I mean, what was most interesting about Symbiote from your perspective? Uh, why should we really care about it? Why should our audience care about it? And what are other threats that are maybe similar or that we should be concerned about?
Yeah, thank you, Isma. Well, first, when we discovered it, it was by the end or the beginning of 2022. And then we presented with it took time, to research it and then to present it in June. And While looking back to the code and also working with PDNS data, we found that the threat actor behind it has been on the market since at least 2018. And of course, the nature of the Linux ecosystem is they are usually, I mean, those systems are not protected. And why it's so? Because even when you go to the official Ubuntu website, one of the most popular distributions, right? There is a section called the most basic set of rules, and it's official. So the first rule, it's immediately install security updates. Second rule, do not install antivirus as you really, and the word really is highlighted, don't need it in Linux unless you share files with Windows. That is like an official statement, imagine, from Ubuntu. But the reality is this: once you get a threat living in your Linux system and you don't have any anti-malware product, you don't have any visibility, so how are you going to detect it? Some may say, yeah, well, we're going to use like a network traffic, to match those patterns. But if you're lucky enough, because in case of Symbiot, for instance, it used several anti-evasion techniques, including those ones like to evade detection based on exfiltration. So that made that backdoor, just like long living one, staying in Linux systems forever and stealing sensitive information from network traffic, also from locally saved passwords, and opening door like to for incoming connections from external world. And according to our findings, it was found like in like really big financial institutions which are in top 100, and also some sensitive security related organizations. So it makes think us like how many passwords and sensitive data the threat actor behind was able to steal. How many of those victims are still there just because the systems are still infected and they don't know about that. We don't know about that, but the threat actor behind it may know about that.
That's very good. Those are very good reminders. And looking at the report we wrote, we mentioned that part of the focus of this campaign was in Latin America, right? And I'm looking at the comments as we are live here on LinkedIn, and please keep the comments coming. I see a lot of audience joining us from all over the world, but also from Latin America, Ecuador, Mexico, from Portugal. Yeah, well, that's in Europe, right? But Brazil, all over the world, really. So thanks for joining us live. I know many others will also watch this recording later on. But please, if you have any questions that you want Ryan, Dmitry, myself to answer while we're here live, that's what we're here for. We're also monitoring Twitter. So you have our Twitter handles on the screen. Feel free to send us messages there and we can interact with you in that way. Now, talking about Symbiote, you mentioned some of the techniques. Now, of course, if we talk about threats, we need to talk about the MITRE attack matrix, right? And many times we focus on the exfiltration or the lateral movement or the command and control, which, by the way, I think Symbiote use DNS-CAT, which is not really new, right? Those techniques have been seen for a long time. But what are some of the TTPs that you would highlight as, hey, if you need to focus on something, focus on these things across the attack chain, right? What are the things that you would recommend focusing on?
That is a great question because what we did and what we are going to present next week is we studied three family. We just focused on symbiote orbit, another also Trojan, which is also like designed to steal sensitive information from Linux, and Red Alert ransomware family, specifically targeting Linux systems and specifically uh, virtualization running on Linux. So, based on that analysis, we made a shared map, MITRE attack map with most common TTPs.
Mm.
And like, you know, a silver bullet, you got to pay special attention to these two TA 005. It's about defense evasion, So defense evasion, we have different techniques like masquerading, obfuscating files or information, removal of several tools, virtualization, sandbox evasion, system checks, and TA007 discovery. And here we see also like how the threat actors behind these three families, they rely on software discovery, system information discovery, system network configuration discovery, virtualization, sandbox evasion, again, right, and system checks. So that is at least like where to pay special attention on Linux. If you still think like, okay, I don't need anything, I don't need any anti-malware product or so, but basically those things, of course, there are others. Techniques and procedures to follow, but those two are the most commonly like let's say like exploited by those three threat actors behind those
Right.
attacks.
So essentially, what I like about focusing on defense evasion and discovery is that those things always happen earlier in the attack chain, right? So if we're able to spot this activity, it's going to mitigate the impact of the attack, right? Now, Ryan, I see you nodding. You've been very quiet, and I know you have a lot of experience doing incident response. I'm pretty sure you've seen incidents where Linux servers were involved, right? How often do you see them being leveraged as part of an attack chain, and what type of protections do you typically find when you do this type of analysis?
So as far as the attack chain, I'm sorry. Yeah, me being quiet, I was just laughing at that. What? Yeah, it's weird. As part of the attack chain, we don't see it a ton. It's not obviously as common, in a Windows realm. What we are seeing though is very common, like a lol boss, right? Living off the land, binaries and scripting methodology, but in the Nix realm, if you will. So we're seeing very common things like curl and wget being used to pull files down. And we're also seeing things like proxy scripts, especially SOX5 proxies, reverse or otherwise. And we're also seeing things like toolkits that are being brought in that seem kind of secondary to many of the attacks, especially with ransomware, which is a whole nother discussion coming up here. But we see that for the most part in IR cases, we see like XOR DDoS, we see XMRig, which is so freaking common, coin miners, and they're starting to get fairly advanced in some of these IRs. You'll see Cobalt Strike beacons on Linux servers, and immediately as a ransomware responder, we work so many cases, my senses start tingling, and it's, oh no, it's Cobalt Strike, and you start realizing this is all coin miner. This is just all coin miner related. So we see a lot of that kind of stuff, and I'm happy that we're not seeing a ton more. There was last year the Chachi rat that was actually documented by a couple folks from our overall teams, Ryan Gibson, and then my cohort on IR, Cody Stark. Shout out to the article on the BlackBerry blog. And remote access Trojan, in this case, we identified it was one of the first Linux variants of that found in a case. But even then, it was more just kind of sitting on the C2 access by the threat actor. And it was kind of like, hey, if I can't keep getting into this little Windows box, well, then I'll just pop over there. And so that's the kind of thing we see a lot of in our cases.
Interesting. How about virtualization? Like, we're talking about cloud, obviously public cloud, but how about private cloud, like a fancy term, just to talk about, virtualization on-prem, like the ESX, vSphere. Do you see like the, attackers thinking on, specifically on ransomware that I know is kind of your specialty, thinking of, why would I bother encrypting all of these files in each of the individual VMs when I can just like go and encrypt the whole VM file, right? The virtual disks or virtual memory, and just like encrypt the whole thing at once. I mean, there's an opportunity there. I don't want to give any tips to anybody, but
oh, well, you hit the nail on the head. In ransomware land, the utilization of Linux servers, or I guess the inclusion in the overall attack, has typically been a lateral movement over, poking around, back to Windows land. Unless, of course, and this is becoming far more prevalent to the fact where now I look for this every single case and I expect to find it, is your secure backup servers and your appliances, especially if they're on-prem. A lot of these little suckers are Linux-based, and you'd be surprised at how much these threat actors are, how familiar they are with those devices and navigating through them and having fun with them. The two big things that we're seeing targeted right now are exactly ESXi and then backup servers and services. I won't name any right now because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but you name any of the large backup, like you're like, well, I have so and so. Is that yeah, pretty much. That's fair game and a target. And ESXX and ESXi LAN, we're seeing like the big ones. The largest two by far ransomware crews right now are Lockbit and Black Basta, and both of them have ESXi specific variants along with Linux variants for encryption. So we're seeing the encryption being done on those devices. And when we have a client who say I had a recent case with 3 servers in an ESX cluster, and everything was encrypted on the ESX side. So they were like, we've got like 40, 50 servers. They're all down. What do we do? I'm like, well, do you have backups of the actual VMDKs and the VMX files? Oh no, we don't back those up. Or we'll typically get we back those up using blah 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 system, which also was encrypted. So your Linux servers are absolutely not safe, especially in the face of ransomware. It's very important to take a look into those things. And protection wise, we see very, very little. In fact, often we see nothing. We don't see any actual protections. If it's one of our clients who, maybe comes in through an IR, it'll often be, hey, this server got hit. We didn't have our client on it. We didn't have the protect client on it. And it's like, why? It's included in your license. How become? And it'll be just like Dmitry said, like, well, it's it's Linux, right? we don't need to secure that, right? When we do find something on devices, it will often be an EDR as opposed to a general EPP, if you will, the next gen AV or whatever you want to call it. And again, what I find with those EDRs, what we find is that they may be logging things like, again, I'll go back to the LOLBOS methodology. Curl, wget, cron tab entries are like every single case we see cron tab being abused. There's so many of those that trying to wade through the alert fatigue is very difficult for organizations. And for that matter, they're not even trying it. And because of that, Linux is just kind of like, you just use the bash CLI to your advantage and it kind of goes under the radar.
So if you have Linux systems, right, and you're listening to this, now you know that yes, there is malware for Linux systems. There's been for a long time, right? Obviously, but this is an increasing trend, and we're going to see more of that. Please keep the comments going. We have people saying hi from all over the world, from Saudi Arabia, from California, from New York, from Montreal in Canada. Excellent. We have good questions. Jesus Cabrera says, hi, Jesus. Have you seen specific malware designed for containers, standalone or Kubernetes systems? That's a very good question. Have we seen any of those?
I can say right now in IR land, we have not seen Kubernetes specific malware, but we're waiting to see it essentially at this point. There's a couple things out there. The first Google hit you see for this is Siloscape. And there are a couple different malware specimens. We're seeing more like proof of concept, like POC, as we call it, code, where we're seeing attempts to identify if Docker is running. Now, in the past, when we saw that, we'd see something like Docker Kubernetes was running. Well, let's shut it down. And then often that was also in like a ransomware case, such that those services are not running so that we can encrypt them. If you encrypt a database that's live and running, even if it's atomically transacting, it's not really going to matter a whole lot. You can potentially destroy that database, and there's no decryptor that's going to fix that, right? These days, we're seeing more poking into the actual containers themselves. And while I haven't seen container-specific malware, we are seeing malware that's attempting to interact with those. So as far as the IR side, I'm sure that it's just on the horizon.
Yeah. And it's interesting that since most of these containers are built in a different way, right? Like with infrastructure as code, all it takes is, adding specific codes to one of these images and can be replicated across multiple systems at scale. So that's something to definitely watch over the next few months or years, right?
It's going to happen for sure. I was checking my Twitter, and I've just found that back in 2015, on November 8th, I tweeted a screenshot of code. It was actually a ransomware for Linux, and I said, no more debates about malware for Linux is a myth. Here, a new ransomware detected as Trojan ransom, blah, blah, blah. So it took, of course, by that time it was like an isolated case, and probably someone said, well, yeah, well, you see only one, so we are safe. But so what? We're here, 2022, and we are speaking about ransomware like as a trend. Again, red alert we use for our presentation next week. It's also actually it's built to encrypt virtualization based on Linux. There's a special routine even like to stop all running VMs first and then to encrypt all those disks. So we see if, as for now, let's say we don't have a trend for something, or even like we haven't seen like a piece of malware specifically designed for something, it's a matter of time until it will be so, because it's about financial motivation for those who are behind those attacks. So we're gonna see that.
And talking about scene, and I know that I usually said like the truth is in the packets, right? And I still believe that, but I guess I need to extend that to the truth is in the telemetry. And we collect a lot of telemetry from all of our sensors that we have, all over the world from different products. Now, I know we've been looking at that lately, and some of the research that you've seen, and a lot of the research you're going to see coming next in the next few months from this team, it's actually going to be based out of that, what we're going to be discussing in Black Hat next week as well. Can you give us like some highlights, Dimitri, on what we have seen in our telemetry and what type of attacks we're seeing?
Sure. Yeah. So it was very interesting to prepare these statistics specifically for this webinar. We just asked ourselves, so, but what have we seen like on our side? So it's not about attempts, it's not about theory, it's about attacks which happen and we prevent it. So it's interesting to start that this month. In other words, like in the last 30 days, we prevented more than 20,620 attempts on Linux with Linux malware. And in the last week, it was 146 attempts. So it's definitely there. Another interesting thing is if we speak about geographic location, so the main target is US, according to our visibility, BlackBerry visibility. So US is the main target, and then followed by Korea, South Korea, but also in other countries which are most targeted, it's Mexico and Brazil. Now, what about like who are the potential victims? Let's say who, those threat actors behind those attacks, like who they targeted, and transportation industry. It's the most targeted one, and it makes sense, and we'll say why. And then followed by commercial and professional services and public sector. So all those three of them, it's about like let me see, it's more than 60% of all Linux attacks. And basically, transportation relies on they want reliable systems. It's like you can't run on something like like continuous processes and then like, oh, your system has been updated, just like don't do not plug off your cable, we're going to install updates. And for the public sector it's the same. Yeah, in some countries, especially in Latin America, it's some sort of law. It's like a policy. If you're public sector, yes, okay, you know what to do. You have to work with Linux, so just go and build your systems based on Linux. And of course, targeted attacks are targeted. But what can we say about like what are the most popular, right? Like massive attacks. Like what families are those? And first of all, it's DDoS, different like malware designed, specially built, to launch DDoS attacks from Linux. So basically, the idea is to infect those devices and to start launching attacks. And it's confirmed also because our top of those families is also formed by Mirai botnet, for example. We know it's also like a special botnet, also to launch attacks, and some other families as well. So it's real. Even like if you think like, okay, but well, I have a, let's say I have my backup, so I don't fear ransomware. Like, I don't care about ransomware. My data is not sensitive. I can recover quickly. But what if your computer, if your system, Linux system, is infected with some sort of DDoS tool, and it will start just like launching attacks to others. It's a pain.
Absolutely, absolutely. Very good questions, Santiago. Nice to have you here as well. Santiago's asking about infrastructure as code. I feel like we're going to have to, answer that probably in following sessions, because we've been talking for almost like half an hour. Wow. And I know that we haven't even like touched on anything that is like non-Linux, but the reality is, if we talk about ransomware, right? Ryan, I would like to ask you, like, what are the things that we should be, worried about, and what are the things that you're going to be talking about next week at Black Hat that is ransomware related, that it's Linux and Windows, right?
Yeah, next week, one of the
peek.
things we're going to be talking about is, keeping your eyes on the prize. And when the threat actor comes into your environment, if you are quote unquote well tooled, then you have endpoint protection, whether it be Silence Protect that we offer or whatever else, right? Those binaries that are being looked at hopefully will be caught. So if a threat actor comes into the environment, right, say they get in via brute forcing or credential stuffing, remote desktop protocol, right, which was enabled on some edge facing server for whatever reason, when it shouldn't have been, no firewall rules to lock it down. The threat actor gets into the environment. And from there, the threat actor says, oh, looky, yay, right? I'm going to go do some fun stuff. They try to open up Internet Explorer and go grab malware tools, and enhanced security configuration is enabled, as it should be, hopefully, on like every server you have, just about. And it says, hey, you can't browse the internet, silly. This is a server. It's an important server. And they say, okay. So they just use curl, which is now built in a Windows server, and they bring down Google Chrome's installer, and they just install Google Chrome, right? Now they have access, and then now they start downloading a bunch of fun tools.
None of that is noisy at all, right? None of that is noisy at all, by the way.
Oh, no, it's just downloading Chrome, right? So whatever.
On a server.
It's bypassing ESC easily. And then all of a sudden they go, well, I want Mimikatz, which is a tool that's very commonly used to essentially dump credentials out of memory and use those credentials to move laterally throughout an environment. So they try to bring Mimikatz in, and your endpoint protection says, no. We know about Mimikatz. Like, that's not going to happen. So instead of the threat actor giving up and going away, they just go, oh, well, I'll just use some native method to obtain credentials. So then they'll try to use the task manager to dump out the process memory of the LSAS process, which is where the Windows secrets are stored essentially in Windows. So you have EPP, and it blocks read and write access to LSAS. The threat actor goes, well, dang it. And then they just go, well, what if I can just save the registry hives? And they just use reg.exe to save the system and, all your fun registry hives and your SAM hive. Now they have all your fun stuff. How are you going to see those? Well, this malware won't work, so I'll use a native method. Oh, even that native method didn't work. I'll use some other more innocuous native method. How do you see those things? EDR. That's how you see those things. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about, how to make custom rules to identify those types of things and how to weed through the traffic, the alert fatigue, if you will. Hopefully you don't have that to identify, like, that's bad. So go look at that. That's what we want to do, right?
I love it. I everybody listening here that has watched any of my presentations, that I love to talk about prevention running in parallel to detection and response, but also visibility, right? You need to have different vantage points, and EDR provides you with visibility, right? That you need to handle threats and to be able to get those, to see what's going on in the system and collect that telemetry. Now, talking about, to wrap it up, right? To wrap up this amazing conversation. I know we could talk about this for hours, but let's summarize. What are some of the countermeasures, some of the recommendations that you would recommend? We talk about visibility, right? EDR, to defend a Linux environment. Are there any other recommendations that you would like to throw in?
I gotta go patching. Patch. Hey, patch. The reason I say that is, it used to be number 3 and low in the totem pole of entry vectors, especially for ransomware. It used to be phishing and RDP way up there, and then software vulnerability / exploitation way down here. That is no longer the case. In fact, it's taking over the number 1 spot and flip-flopping now with the other 2. And a lot of that are Linux servers that are considered to be appliances, whether they're network appliance based or other, that are not being patched. And I just had a case recently with another log4shell exploitation. If you're familiar, VMware Horizons should have been patched back in November-ish, like whenever that official chain came out and everyone was freaking out about it. So we see those things often, and your Linux servers, be very, very careful of considering a third-party device or an appliance in your environment as wholly off limits. Like, you need to make darn sure those things are being updated, and if you're responsible for them, then go do that.
Nothing is off limits. Absolutely. How about you, Dimitri? Any recommendations?
Yeah. So basically, we have to assume that sooner or later, probably it also will hit us. I mean, thinking from the customer side, let's say if I were like there defending an organization, so I have to start thinking when it will happen with me. So what will I do? So no improvisation must be there. It's just like we need to start like working on the purple team and what it means. Okay, to emulate threat actors and not generically, not like here's my playbook for all ransomwares in the world. It's it's crazy. Yeah, you have to work on your threat module to see who are your threat actors, what probabilities of the impact you may have and what is the impact, and then to start also emulating those threat actors specifically for you, and to see how is your visibility. Do you have enough visibility? How's your recovery? If like, okay, you lost everything, but can you recover, like, seriously? I mean, like,
Yeah.
really. And of course, in order to do that, it's not also like, let's emulate this threat actor and let me guess how it operates. You need to know, and to know it, you need cyber threat intelligence. You need that information on your side, provided by your CTI provider. So you can actually work with that digested information to minimize the risks, to lessen the impact, and so on.
Exactly, right, and that's where we can help as well as an organization. Absolutely. Well, let me just add one more, and it's something that I have seen also, and I have learned over the years doing incident response and as a cyber defender as well. It may not sound super exciting, but if I say, least privilege, applied least privilege, yeah, sounds boring, like patching, right? Like what Ryan mentioned. But if I say zero trust, oh, hold on a second, that's sexy, right? That's cool. It's the same thing, right? Applied least privilege. I have seen so many times, and I did this myself as a penetration tester for some time. You break into a Linux server on the DMC, right, and then you find that those services are running as root. And you can imagine that IT admin, or whoever was engineering the system and building it or setting it up. Hey, this is not working. Set up the database. It's not working. Well, try sudo. Oh yeah, it works. Okay, don't touch it. Right now, you have the server in production running as sudo. You break into that box, and then you have all the GCC, right, the compiler, so you can download any code you want and compile. You have mmap. You have all the tools that you need. You don't have to download anything. It's already there because somebody didn't apply least privilege. So again, something else to think about. We're going to talk more about this and ransomware, Linux threats next week at Black Hat. So hopefully we'll see you there. And if we don't see you in person at Black Hat, what can you do? Well, watch this space, because we're going to continue doing these LinkedIn Live sessions. I hope you enjoyed it. If so, please leave your comments so we can learn from this and incorporate some of your comments in future sessions. And we're also going to do these presentations in the booth. So if you're present at Black Hat in person next week, stop by the booth, see us there. Ryan, Dmitry, and myself, we're going to be doing presentations there around noon, 1 p.m. And you will have a chance to get this book, Finding Beacons in the Dark. We were giving those away at RSA, and man, there was big success. Like, everybody loved it. This is a book that the team wrote on how to hunt for Cobalt Strike beacons. And everybody that has looked at the book, everybody loved it. So I'm pretty sure you will have a chance to get your own copy. And there's also an electronic version of that you can download from our BlackBerry website for free. So you can get that too. If you don't have a chance to attend next week and see the presentation live, again, we're going to have more of these sessions, and also we're going to write a blog post with the outcome of our research so everybody can enjoy it. All right. Well, all I have to say is thank you so much, Dmitry and Ryan. I really enjoyed the conversation, and look forward to seeing you next week at Black Hat. And for everybody else, we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you and see you soon. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Isma.